Hey, it's Derek Depker here of Bestseller Secrets with Christina Kaye. Going to be talking about how to create a phenomenal fiction novel, and we're going to be diving into the 3 secrets to writing a successful novel. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Derek. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
Sure thing. And a little bit about Christina, and I'll let you share your story, but you're an author, coach, book editor, public speaker. You do a lot with editing all kinds of books, but especially fiction. You are a master of the fiction writing process, so we're going to be diving into that a little bit. And her book, Write Your Best Book, offers it's her business, Write Your Best Book, offers a wide range of book editing and author coaching services, as well as self-publishing and marketing assistance for clients. So Christina, can you share a little bit more about your background and how you got into doing what you're doing?
Sure thing, Derek. So I, about 15 years or so ago, decided I wanted to be a writer. I'd always loved writing. I'd always enjoyed getting essay assignments in high school. I know that sounds kind of dorky, but I did. I enjoyed it. But I didn't know you could make a living with anything having to do with writing. I thought it was like I was going to be a starving artist, So I never pursued it. But when I was in my early 30s, mid 30s, I thought, I really do want to write a book. So I tried it and it failed miserably. I got nothing but crickets from agents and publishers, and it was deserved because it was a really horribly written book. But that's just because I failed at one of the 3 secrets that I'm going to talk to you about today. And I just didn't put enough effort into it. I just thought it was as easy as sitting down, as many people do, and just writing the book. And there you go. It's magic. Doesn't quite work that way. So long story short, I dug deep and I learned all I could about the techniques and the process of writing and the craft of writing. Fast forward a few years, I ended up getting an agent and getting published, published 5 books traditionally, one of which won a National Book Award, all of them suspense, by the way. That's what I write in. And then I started getting requests from friends on the side. Hey, you've written a book, you're published, edit my book. Okay, I'll do it for a couple $100, whatever. And then that turned into a pretty decent side gig. Fast forward again to 2020, I was able to quit my corporate career as a paralegal and focus on Write Your Best Book, the business you mentioned. And I'm now an author coach, book editor, podcast host, public speaker, all that. I wear many different hats in the author world, but I'm still an author. I still write books, slower than usual, slower than I used to, but I still do write. So I'm one of you. I write novels too, so I know the pains and the struggles that authors go through.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And it brings up, before we get into the 3 secrets, this idea comes up for me, which is a couple things that I hear. One is the novelist who is sitting there writing it and they're going, I don't know if my book is any good, or I'm kind of scared. Like, is actually any good? Are people going to like it? Like, that's one category of person. We can dive into that in a second. Then there's another category of person who might be like, oh, I know my book is great. It's fine. I probably don't need any work with that. And it's really just, getting the word out about it. And I sit there and I tend to, being a marketing guy, tend to just assume, okay, people's books, I'm just going to assume it's good and let's talk about how to market it. However, I sit there and I also realize that, some people might not have the, ability to be objective with their own work and actually know, wait, is this book really up to par? So before we get into these 3 secrets, and maybe you'll be able to diagnose as you're listening to this, if how good your book is, even though that's somewhat subjective. Like, what would you say to someone? How do you assess whether or not your manuscript is really a quality manuscript?
Great question. Before I give you the assessment tool, which I do have an idea on that, I want to say, you mentioned, maybe some people aren't able to be as objective about their writing. Honestly, and this may be a controversial thing to say, but some people, I was not born to dance. If you look at my TikTok account, you can tell I am not born to dance. and I'm not born to play basketball or football. Some people are maybe more naturally gifted with writing, and some may not have that natural gift, but that doesn't mean you can't learn. That doesn't mean you can't, dig in and practice and learn all you can, but it just may be a harder or longer journey for some authors than others. Just like if I decided I wanted to pick up playing basketball, it would be a long, long journey to get there. Too late when I'm 42 years old at this point. But that's the big thing I want to make sure that some people know, is that don't feel bad if it doesn't come naturally to you, because it's a talent, it can be learned. But as far as if you've already written it, or you're in the process of writing it and you can't really gauge and you're like, oh, I don't know, I think it's good, but is it? I think one of the best things that any author can do, I prefer to do it after you finish your first draft, is to go ahead and get some beta readers. Whether that could be anything from, I recommend you not use mom, dad, brother, sister, husband, wife, because what are they going to do? They're going, oh, it's great. Oh, it's wonderful. No changes. They're not going to tell you anything you really need to hear, which is great, but you're not going to learn from that. So I would recommend getting online on social media, look into writers groups. There's all kinds of groups for beta readers, swapping and back and forth, and just find some other people. It doesn't matter their experience level, but just somebody who also has an eye for writing, and let them read through your manuscript, and get some just feedback from readers and writers alike, and see what the general feedback is. Now, I'm not talking about editing yet. Just read the script, see what it sounds like, get some feedback. And then that's usually the best way to gauge, okay, this is how far I am. I need to do this, this, and this before I can actually really think about publishing it. That'd be my best advice.
Yeah. And it's something that it's so important to have that outside feedback, because it's, for myself, for any of us as writers or creatives, it's hard, when I talk to someone, they're like, I don't know if my manuscript is any good. I'm like, well, who have you shown it to? I'm like, well, no one. Right. And so it becomes this kind of chicken or the egg. Like, I can't show it to people until I feel it's good, but how will it get good until you show it to people and get that feedback? So it takes that willingness to say, this might suck. That's okay. It's more emphasizing, it's less about being good or perfect and more about the progress of improving and valuing that at a higher level, to say, hey, I get some beta readers, be brutally honest, or, hey, maybe I'm a little sensitive, but be honest in a nice way, but whatever it is, to get that real feedback from people in order to have that outside perspective. Because at the end of the day, especially with novels, it's about, someone can say, well, it's good writing or this or that, but the beta readers can say, I was entertained. I was drawn in. I was, I couldn't put it down, right? That's how you know you got a winner, because it's the actual emotional response. So with that, let's go into how you actually create that effect where people are drawn into the book. They can't put your book down. They want to read everything that you're writing, and they're telling their friends, like, you got to check out this book. So what is the first secret to writing a successful novel?
Well, the first secret I kind of gave away a little bit when I was talking about my bio, my background, is number one is to learn all you can possibly learn about the craft of writing a novel. I think that is the, out of the 3 steps, the 3 secrets, quote unquote, the most important and first step you have to take is to learn as much as you possibly can. I always use this analogy when I am talking about my 3 secrets, and which are not really big secrets. It's just nobody thinks about these things. My first example is, think about it this way. If you wanted to be a concert pianist or a violinist or something like that, and you decided today, you know what, I've always wanted to be a violinist, I'm going to do this. You would not call Radio City Music Hall or wherever it is that they do these things, and you would not book a big public forum and say, I'm going to play a concerto next week. You just wouldn't do that. What would you do? You would buy a violin cheap somewhere, and you'd start learning. You would start learning how to read sheet music. You would work with an instructor who would teach you all the notes and what they mean, and you'd start with Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you'd work your way up, right? It may take a year or so to get to where you would even feel comfortable playing in front of your family, let alone a concert hall. But that's the first step, I honestly believe, is you cannot just, because that's where my problem was I thought I was a good storyteller, thought I was a strong writer, but I didn't know all those pesky little writing rules. Show, don't tell, don't use passive voice, et cetera, et cetera. So I just dove in, and I just don't think that you can do that And I mean, you can do that, but you're going to end up spending a lot more time learning it the hard way. So in essence, I think the best thing to do is go online. Excuse me, I've had a frog in my throat all day. Pen and all these people, there are plenty of resources online that have all kinds of different forums where you can learn as much as you can about writing that book before you actually dive in and start typing it.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that it might seem kind of like, okay, that learn what you can about the craft of writing. Maybe that someone goes, well, okay, I've heard that before. That doesn't seem all that new. And for me, I look at that and I go, yeah, but that's one of those things where you can never emphasize the fundamentals too much, because I've been writing since, I guess, 2011. But, some of the things about, you mentioned show, don't tell. I didn't realize how much I was telling versus showing until even I still catch it. And even the last year or two, I'm learning new insights on that and new skills about that. I remember it was a couple years ago. Now I'm in the nonfiction space, but it's still tell stories as a nonfiction writer and so on and so forth. And I realize, oh yeah, I'm using more passive voice here. It could be more active. I'm not creating sensory details and stuff. And all this came because I invested thousands of dollars in actually learning the craft of writing. So on one hand, you could say, yeah, you can put out material out there even before you develop that. But my writing has improved so much over the past couple of years by really prioritizing the craft of writing and compelling writing, persuasive writing, learning these things, and then of course getting feedback from like an editor and from readers who can actually point that out and say, hey, here's where that's really vague. I can't picture that. Describe that in more details, things like that help so much. So, it's never a point where you mentioned music. Like, it's not a point where you just stop going like, oh, I got the whole craft down.
Yeah,
I've totally mastered it. I don't need to keep learning about this. It's an ongoing process.
It is. Absolutely.
So
no, it is. And I'm still, I catch myself doing things and I've been at this 15 years, there still will be things every now and then I'm like, well, I never thought of that, So it's an ongoing process of learning all you can, and like you just said, it's a perfect example. You just keep learning as you go and get better and better. It's just practice.
So on that note, what's the next secret? So someone, assume they're invested in learning, they're constantly studying the craft. What's the next part?
Okay, so and I will agree with you. One thing you said earlier, you're right. None of these are necessarily the most shocking secrets that you never ever heard before. Granted, but like you said, they're also some of those fundamentals that we almost take for granted. So one, learn your craft. Two, I believe, is now you've written a draft. You've written your first draft of your book. Regardless of whether you think it needs a second draft or, you should always self-edit before you do anything, but the very next step is to work with professionals. I think that is something that I get a lot of pushback on because it is an investment. It is quite an investment. Like you said, you spent several $1,000s on your book, and that it's not cheap. You can find cheaper ways to do it, and you can cut corners here and there as long as you're not cutting into the quality. But I think the second most important thing you can do is now you've got this great manuscript, you've written it, you've learned all you can, and you've got it as good as you can. Now what? Now you need to get professional help from an editor or coach or whatever, whether it's me or anybody else, just someone who knows what they're doing. Don't ever write a book. Please don't ever write a manuscript and just throw it up on Amazon. If you're in a pinch and you can't spend the money that's required for an editor, there are services out there. I don't recommend all of them, but you could find Upwork, Fiverr. There are different ways you can find budget, but have someone who knows what they're doing look over your manuscript. Same goes for a cover, all those sorts of things. If you are willing to put a little bit of an investment, time-wise and money-wise, into your book. There's a statistic, Derek, that I love statistics. I actually don't know if you've read the book, Nabokov's Favorite Color is Mauve. Have you seen that book? I can't remember the author's name. I wish I could give him credit, but off the top of my head, I can't. It's a book of statistics on writing, and it's a great book. But so I love digging into facts and statistics, and there is one that came out in 2019 that said that new writers who tend to not, let's be honest, tend to not want to put money into or be able to put money into an editor or a book cover, whatever. Their average annual book sales are about $500 if they get there. However, more seasoned veterans who have learned that they need to hire an editor, get a book cover designer, maybe they spend $1,000, $2,000. Actually, their average annual salary is $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So there's something to that. I understand that it's hard to swallow. It's a hard pill to swallow to think I've got to put down $300 for a cover and then maybe $1,000 for editing and then a couple hundred more for formatting. That's a hard pill to swallow. But let me tell you, it's an investment in your future. It's an investment in your career, and it's an investment in your book. And if you don't do some level of that, you're lessening your chances of being successful.
Right on. And I mean, if anyone's followed my work or following, this channel and what I teach, then it's going to have a business oriented mindset. Even as a novelist, it's taking that approach that this is an investment into my business. I wouldn't open up a brick and mortar store and not have the capital to pay the electric bill or to pay the employees or to, do the basic, get an accountant to make sure everything's in order. Like, you just wouldn't start a business if you didn't have the capital. So if it's the same thing as an author, and you bring up a good point here that, this is approaching it like a professional, and it's more costly not to invest in these services because, like I use the example, say a book cover, but it could just as easily be an editor. What's more expensive, a $5 book cover or $500 book cover? Well, it depends. Maybe you get a phenomenal $5 book cover, but if the $5 book cover sucks and results in no sales, that actually costs you money. But if the $500 cover helps generate thousands and tens of thousands of dollars worth of sales, then that helped pay. It not only paid for itself, it then put money in your pocket. So it's so important to get professionals to approach this with the mindset that you are a pro. This is what you do. You're a professional author. You're a professional novelist. And if you don't have the capital to invest in an editor or cover designer, then maybe you need to do some other services or something else to generate that money so you can then invest it into your business. But investing to me it's not a nice to have. It's a need to have thing that's just absolutely essential to your success as an author.
Absolutely well said.
All right. So what's the next secret?
Okay, and it kind of ties in with number 2, but number 3, this is going to be a little up your alley, I think, is to market the heck out of your book. I know that's a little oversimplistic because obviously we all know, well, you would think we all knew that we have to market our books, but it's similar to step 2 in that it's yet another return, that you've heard the term, I know you have, ROI, return on investment, and that's what you're going to see here. And I'm not even saying you have to spend thousands of dollars and hire a publicist and hire a professional marketer. You can, and that might increase your odds of selling well. But even if you have put all the money that you've invested and you've already spent it on mostly on editor, book cover, format, or whatever, and now you're tapped out, there are so many different ways that a self-published author, an indie author, can still market their book for little to no money. But if you don't do any of that, and I'll tell you what some of those are briefly, if you don't do any of these things, it's going to sit there. As beautiful as your cover is, as beautiful as it's maybe written, if no one hears about it, no one knows it's out there, it's just going to sit there on Amazon. So just a few quick things people can do on their own. These couple things will cost a little bit of money, but not much. Facebook ads and Amazon ads, maybe even Google ads. But even if you can't afford that to start with, as long as you have a good, steady foundation on your social media and you strike a fine balance with your audience, 80-20, I always say. 80% of nurturing your audience and 20% is selling to them. So engage with your audience on social media, rather than just trying to push your book. Buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Don't do that. But you do want to stay engaged with your community. And then maybe every 4, 5, 6 posts say, oh, by the way, I've got this great book. Here it is. It's on sale for 99 cents this weekend. Those kinds of things can be very effective. Also, having an author website, you can do those for $20 or less on Wix or Squarespace or WordPress, but that's very, very essential, a home for your books to be sold from. Of course, you link to Amazon, but little things like that. I mean, you could do your research and learn more things to do, but that's the key point for number 3, which is you can't just edit it and get a good cover and write a great book and then put it up there and sit back and hope that the best happens. You got to be proactive in marketing.
Okay, great. So to recap, you're investing in the craft of writing. You're investing in getting professionals to support with this. This is a team effort. Outsiders are going to see things. Another point on that is, even if you're a great editor yourself as a writer, let's say you go, oh, I could maybe edit it myself. Yeah, it's just like we have our blind spots. When you're the one who wrote the material, I've noticed this, like there's just some limitation that you run up against where outside eyes, especially if they go, well, this part doesn't make sense. If you're the author, it makes sense in your head. Your head, but it takes that objective feedback from the outside. And the third thing is to market the book. So now at this point, this is a great foundation, great reminder for some people who are more experienced, great introduction for those who are starting out. I'd love to dive in, take at least a few minutes to actually zoom in and get tactical now. So if we look at, let's go through the writing process of novel writing. What's one, at least one, we might go through a couple, but what's one of the biggest mistakes that you see when you're editing a manuscript that a lot of novelists make, that you say to watch out for?
Okay, I have top 3, so let's see if we can squeeze them in here. The first biggest mistake I see when I do, and this is across the board because we do sample edits, I do 5-10 a day, is not starting your book in the right place, not starting your book in the right way. Real quick tip on that is, if you don't know how to start your book in a compelling way, here's what you do. You want to make sure that you're introducing your protagonist in their ordinary world, living life, up until the point that the inciting incident comes at them and forces them into action, which will be the journey that is your book. So it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be one way or the other. There's no hard and fast rule on exactly how to start your book. It's more so, don't start your book this way. Don't start your book with a cliche, which is waking from a dream, waking from a coma, standing in the mirror, brushing their teeth and thinking, jogging while thinking. All those have been done so many times before. It's just not interesting enough. And the reader's going to be like, yeah, next. So that's the biggest thing, is just make sure that you're starting your book. Don't kill yourself over that first sentence. I think we add so much pressure that we've got to have this great hooky, great sentence. Sure, that helps, but this is just your first draft. Just get it down on the page and write a beginning that is intriguing and hooks the author and grabs their attention. Don't give me a setting description that's 2 pages long. Just don't do it. That's the first thing, is how you open your book. The next thing is a lot of head hopping, which that's a tricky one because it all depends on which, whether you're writing first person or third person or whatever. But at the end of the day,
can you define that for those who don't know?
Yeah, head hopping is where you have, if you're writing in one character's perspective, regardless of if you're ultimately going to use several characters, in any given scene, and you're in that character scene, it can only be one character that we know what they think, feel, observe, want, desire, need, anything. It has to be that one character only, unless you put a hard scene break and then move on to the next character. And then we can know what they want, see, think, observe, need, desire. So basically, I think that is the most common thing, because especially if you're writing in third person, which is where it's he, she, rather than I, as far as the narrative goes, is that they toggle between characters so much that the reader gets confused as to, wait a minute, I thought we were following Peter, and now Jane's telling me what she thinks. I'm so confused. So just watch for head hopping, and we can always, get more into that some other time. But it's basically just make sure that your character, that you're showing their perspective, you stay in their perspective and no one else's. And then the third thing is not showing, don't tell, show, don't tell. Yes, that's it. But I want to take it a step further, in that what I see authors failing to do is give me that emotional depth from the protagonist, like that connection with the protagonist. So instead of telling me they're angry in a certain scene, show me how they're angry. Show me what their face looks like, how their brow furrows, how their jaw clenches, and then go beyond that and tell me what they feel inside. Does their stomach clench up? Does their heart rate excel? So use internal and external emotional reactions. That will help us get to know the character better, relate to them, and root for them.
Beautiful. Yeah. So we got the first thing is not starting the book the right way. And I heard a stat recently. I think the average book, people read on average the 18 pages of a book before they
Oh,
put it
wow.
down and never read it again. Now, I don't know if that's a certain genre, but I just heard that about books in general, that people
I
read on
believe
average
it.
18 pages. I bet a lot of people, I think if you take the average book these days, probably there's a lot of books that people have. I know I have them on my Kindle and on my bookshelf that just don't even get read, right?
They look good. You just
Eventually
have to
one day, one of
check.
these days, maybe 7 lifetimes from now, I'll get to it. But like, so first of all, if you don't, in a nutshell, if you don't hook someone,
Hmm.
like hook someone in the description, hook someone where they can preview that first, that first page, first few pages, that's a lot of your marketing. I mean, we talk about marketing, but it all integrates, because if people are previewing that and they get sucked in, and then they get to the end, if we're talking about an ebook preview, even if someone was in a library and they're, checking out the first book and they go, do I want to get this? Do I want to check this out? Like, that is going to be the hook that sells them. And you gave a great tip here, which is, just get that first draft done. And here's what I noticed. And now I'm coming from a nonfiction perspective, and I find the writing process is often similar.
It
What I
is.
find is that if I'm writing something, if I give I might just write it and then I go, I'm going to figure out that opening hook later. Like, let me
Mhm.
just get some drafts, and you start to tell the story, especially if I do something story driven. And then within that, I'm going, okay, what's the most intense kind of, a really dramatic part of the story? Okay, let me put that up front. And then, maybe kind of like if you've seen movies where it starts at the, really dramatic scene, and then it kind of
Yeah.
flashes back later to give the backstory. So instead of trying to figure all that out in advance, it's just like, let me just write the draft, get the ideas down, and then find the hook later. So you find that works in fiction.
I think that's great. And I agree with you, that applies to nonfiction too, because even if you're writing a book on, I'm just thinking of some recent examples I've edited, like homesteading, for example. I did one up for a client who homesteaded, and she wrote her story about how to homestead, how to live off the grid. And you still have to, even in nonfiction, you still got to grab that reader on those first few pages. Think of it this way. If you're in a bookstore, or even nowadays on Amazon where you get the free look inside, the first thing that's going to catch their attention is the cover. Hands down. We know that. That cover is going to catch their attention. Then around that same time will be the title may snag their attention. But what's the very next thing? If your blurb is great and your cover is great and everything's caught their attention, they're going to flip open that book and they're going to read the first page. And you've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. And so you just got to keep that in mind when you're writing it. But again, like we both said, first off, just get it down on the page. You can go back and make it more compelling later, but get your story down on the page for sure. You can always, there's a Jodi Picoult quote that I love that says you can edit almost anything except a blank page. So, and I totally butchered her quote, but it's something like that. It's something like that.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a good reminder, because I do editing for, it's not really editing in the traditional sense, but I do copywriting feedback for people who will send
Oh,
me
okay.
copy, and and a lot of times they are telling stories, their personal story. And I'm like, sometimes I hear people that are like, I spent like 60 minutes. I remember one person was like, I spent 90 minutes and I couldn't come up with anything. I'm like, you'd be better off spending 10 minutes writing crap that we can at least edit and pull something out of that,
Exactly.
find one sentence that was good that we go, let's expand on that, then just end up with nothing. Because you can't do anything, right? You just, like you're saying, the quote, you can't edit the blank page.
Mhm.
So getting it down, and then that, ties in, of course, having the outside, the editors and people that can take a look at
Mhm.
it. So to recap the mistakes, so we talked about the introduction, how it starts out, hooking them in, head hopping, going from different characters' perspective in the same scene. You can kind of read the minds of different characters in the all in one scene. You're like, wait, whose perspective am I in? All over the place. So making sure it's focused on one character per scene.
Mhm.
And then show, don't tell, which is going to be probably a common thing that many people hear. And it's so commonly said because it's such a common mistake. It's
Right. That's
such a
right.
regular thing that happens. And what helped me with this, where I first learned this just a couple of years back, was this idea of Jerry Spence. He was a trial lawyer and never lost a case. I believe that's his credibility. And he would talk about, he'd basically, be a storytelling. It was a lot of these principles. And
It is. Yeah.
one of the quotes was, speak in actions, not abstractions. So it's one thing to say health, or they were healthy. But it's like, what does that look like? You can't put health in your hand. It's an abstract idea, but they sprung out of bed full of energy, they have a glow on their face. There's a shit like could you close your eyes and picture this and imagine this? And that was the big turning point for me is if you think about show, don't tell, can you close your eyes and actually picture this? And could you give it to 10 different people and they would all see the same thing. So like she ate a piece of fruit. Well, some person's imagining her eating an apple. Some person's imagining her eating a banana, but she ate a green apple. She bit into a green apple. Okay. Well, you're only going to see one type of green apple. That's specific details, sensory details. So that's that specific showing and letting people actually see the action play out. So then they come to the conclusion rather than you always just like telling them this is what they were thinking, feeling, or so on.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Cool. So as we wrap up, any final tips, any like big tip that you want to give, someone's working on their novel and the actual writing and they want to make sure it's as great as possible and for their actual process, before they send it off to an editor?
Yeah, I think that if I had to boil it down to one process thing that you need to actually do before you move on is, I mentioned it very briefly earlier, is to self-edit. So, and it goes along with kind of, Derek, what you were just saying, which is, and we both were talking about how you just get it down on the page, get your story out there. So, but don't stop there. Don't just get the story on the page and then send it off and hope it does well. You've got to go through it yourself with a fine-tooth comb. There's something I like to do, and I've had my clients do, they seem to some enjoy it, is there's a read back feature, especially if you're writing in Microsoft Word, where it will read you can select a huge section, like a paragraph. Well, yeah, I guess you could select more than that, but you select a paragraph of your Word document and Word reads it back to you. And that's a really great tool to use to make sure you haven't missed words, because sometimes, like you said, Derek, we're writing it. We know what we meant to say. We know what we're trying to communicate, and it makes sense to us, but does it actually make sense? Is it actually cohesive? So that's one thing that you can do when self-editing is use that read back feature on Word. And I think it's really, you just look up on the top bar somewhere, it says read back or something. And then just go through it with a fine-tooth comb looking for misspellings. You can use, I want to address one thing really quick. You can use Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly. I think Pro Writing Aid is a little better. To self-edit your book as far as like getting it in a clean condition before you send it to an editor. Just don't rely on that. Don't think that's going to substitute a professional editor. But it might help you as far as, especially Pro Writing Aid has a lot of good tools that will pick up on passive voice and things like that. So if you're struggling with those kind of basic issues, something like that might work for self-editing. And that's what I would do. I would just make sure that you go through it yourself one good time, and don't put any pressure on yourself. That's the big thing. Don't say, I had one client who came to me, she said, I'm publishing my book in 4 weeks. Can you edit it? Why would you put that deadline on yourself like that? Like, no, don't put pressure on yourself. Do it when you get it done. It's a creative process, just like any other art form. It'll get done when it gets done. Just take your time, self-edit, and get it ready, and then move on.
That's great advice, and that's something that what I did with the last book I published, it's been a few years, but I set a deadline, but my deadline was for my rough draft because I want to allow time. If I need some major changes, like I don't know when that's going to be. I don't want to put like an editor under the, to be like, hey, it's coming out in 4 weeks. Like, are there minor changes? Are there major changes? So like that's where you want to give yourself a little bit of cushion. You might set deadlines, but also allowing yourself the room to say, let's make sure you got some time for beta readers to go through this, through multiple rounds of editing. And it's an iteration process. I've heard it. I'm not too familiar with oil painting, but as far as I understand it, it's kind of like you do one layer and then you do a next layer and then you do a next layer. And so it's that same type of process. You don't try to just like all at once, just like perfection. Right? It's just like, Layer one,
Yeah.
iteration two. This next layer, I'm going to look and see if I can add more details. This next layer, I'm going to look through the lens of, am I showing or telling? This next layer, I'm going to look for, what's the emotion, am I conveying the emotions? Like, so you can look at it and give your brain one main thing to focus on as you're reading through, and then go through multiple rounds. And that takes the pressure off of like, I got to just get this whole thing. I'm just going to like channel the perfect manuscript all in one go, which is
Right.
might happen on occasion, but not something I would trust. It puts way too much pressure, and I find it's a lot easier if you just go, you know what, let's get something on the page. And it's so many quotes about this because it's true, right? Writing is rewriting. It's really the editing process that makes a manuscript what it is. So with that, Christina, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight. And if people want to learn more about you, your services, or any trainings or support that you have to offer, where can they go?
Everything to find me, you can always find me at Write Your Best Book, whether it's a website, writeyourbestbook.com, which is where you can find like our success stories, how to work with us, our rates and services, all that fun stuff is on the website. Social media at Write Your Best Book. That makes it pretty easy. It's across all platforms. We're specifically pretty popular on TikTok for some reason. We've got over 1 million video likes and almost 100,000 followers. So we're doing really well there. If you're on TikTok, you don't have to dance. You just have to come watch the video feed. So, but that's about it. So just writeyourbestbook.com for the website and at Write Your Best Book for social media.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any final words for the listeners?
Nope. Just make sure that you just don't pressure yourself. That's the biggest thing we were just saying. And don't stress yourself, because this should be a fun process. Writing should be something you enjoy. And as soon as you put too much pressure on yourself, all of a sudden it becomes a chore. And if you don't end up making a whole bunch of money, well, who wants to do anything for free? So let it be something that you enjoy. Don't get too hard on yourself. Don't put too much pressure. Just write it and enjoy something that you love so much, which is writing a book.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Christina.
Sure thing.